In this video, we're going to take a look at even more ways for cutting out your outlines, and I'll also demonstrate a couple of techniques that I use to paint textures and other elements from scratch. So instead of using photographs or just flat textures, we'll start with just colors and build them up to dimension and form, and then add textures to them using photographic elements. So I have these layers that are just outline layers. So just zoom out here. And I have the cushion, the rocket pack itself, and then the exhaust ports. Okay, so the way I can start doing this is let's just focus on something interesting to start, which would be the rocket pack. I can create a group. I'll copy this name and I'll create a group, paste this, and then I can use either the magic wand, and if that doesn't work, like if we get something like this, which I can probably just use the eraser to get around that. And again, you want to make sure that your eraser has no transfer dynamics so that it's perfectly opaque. You can use transfer dynamics later once you get to the edges, or you can use the lasso tool and just bounce around this and clean this out. If you don't like the look of the actual magic wand tool, you can just use the lasso tool. It works pretty well as also. Okay, so looks pretty good. Just want to make sure we got everything up here okay. I'll size this brush down a little bit. There we go. Now this technique I'm going to show you, sort of similar to the actual torso, it's a little bit more of a realistic texturing process. I'm going to press quit, Control-Shift-I. I've got these extra lines here. I actually don't think I need those on there, so let's go back in here and get rid of those. Then press X to flip my color from, I'm using strictly black and white. If I use a gray color, that has to be your background color, sorry. So you can see it's semi-opaque. So I really want to stick with my black and whites for now. All right, that's pretty good. Now, if I don't want this edge to be too soft or too hard, let's clean up some of these, the eraser. You can also use the brush, of course. If you use the brush, you just have to use the inverse of what you're already using. The problem with this brush is I have a bunch of transfer properties on it, so it's not necessarily the best. There you go. I think that's looking pretty good. So we'll press Q, and then what I can do is Control-Alt-R, and we can do a refine mask on this just to make sure it's looking okay. I think that looks actually pretty good along the edges. I might crop it in a little bit, so let's shift the edge. And these are some settings that are already in there because I got it to remember the settings. You can reset these, of course, but it's good to play with this just to get a sense of how it works. Now, as you can see, let's just turn this mask on and off and go zoom in here. If I turn this mask on and off, you can actually see what's happened, and the mask has made some assumptions in here. I'm just going to undo that, and we'll actually, let's take a couple steps backwards. Okay, so we have the selection here. I want to try this Control-Alt-R again and just really get a look at what's actually going on nice and close. So you can see I'm getting this like blurring out here, and I don't actually want that to happen, and I think that's mostly because of Smart Radius. And put this down to 0. So you can see we get rid of that. I can actually, instead of using the radius adjuster, I can actually just use my shift edge. So if the shift edge is at here and I put it to 0, you can see it makes a fairly nominal difference. It's not huge, but I can bring that edge in a little bit, maybe feather it 0.1 or 0.2, and that'll soften it up. No smooth. I'm going to go around the whole edge and make sure it's looking the way I want. I think it looks pretty good. Okay, great. All right, and then I'm going to go OK. So once we have that, what we should have is it gives us actually a duplicate layer and with a mask on it. You don't have to do that. You can take those exact settings. So let's just do this again. Go Control-Alt-R, and then we can change it to, instead of new layer with mask, we can say layer mask. And go OK, and that'll just automatically add a layer mask to this layer, which we can then drag up to the group and paste in there. And if we do this and we add a solid color, so let's say we want his rocket pack to be sort of like the Rocketeer's rocket pack in kind of a bronzy gold color, and put that in there, you can see how it's working. So it works pretty good. Now that we have this group set up, and here's the outline here. Now the outline doesn't have to stay in here. The outline could actually go on top. It really depends on how much you're cropping in along the edges. I usually use my outline in a separate place, so I'll make a new group and call this the rocket, let's say rocket pack for instance. It should be 3Q for 3/4. these names can change later. I'll have the outline as a separate layer. I might even name it like OT or something for outline. And then inside here is all the color stuff that we're going to do. So that's one way of isolating things. If you have one other object, let's try this one for instance. Another way to do this is these two guys here, which we can't use the magic wand on them at all. Let's group them together. Call it 3Q exhaust 01. Okay. And what we can do here is literally just go in and draw a mask with the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool. I find the polygonal lasso tool is actually pretty fast. I use it a lot because then I go in and I refine that mask after the fact, and it tends to work pretty well for me. Let's go in here. Oops, that's all right. Don't go back. Don't worry about it. You can come back and fix this after the fact. We'll bring this over. There we go. Press Q. Then I can use my eraser to bring that line out a little more that I lost there. Great. Even this one we can bring out a little more. Okay. What I need to do is maybe I'll just erase and just be a little bit outside of those lines. I'm just using my opaque eraser here that I've made. Okay. Q, Control Alt R, and let's see if we can get this to happen here. And now, so now you can see it's come in a lot more intelligently with the Smart Radius enabled. Okay, and then what I can do is let's put this to the red overlay so I can actually see what's happening. And hopefully, I think we can subtract things from this. There we go. So I press Alt and click and drag along here. It should try to clean up to the edge, realizing that that's a dividing line. That's something I don't want in there. There we go. That works a little better. Great. And I'm going to get this edge here. Cool. That's sorted out pretty good. Okay. And there. All right. And I think what I'll do is just track in a little bit on those. So just sort of shift the edge even more on this because we have quite a negative edge shift on that. I need more. And then I'll just soften it up a bit. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and we'll just take that. So it's created a new layer mask, which is awesome. Now let's add a quick solid color, and this will be maybe this, but more brownish, like that. And then let's put it below, and let's see what we're getting. If it looks okay to us now, then it's probably okay. The other thing you can do is you could grab a more interesting, let's say an eraser, for instance. If you wanted to create a jaggy edge, you could just add some shape dynamics, put on a size jitter, an angle jitter, brush tip. Let's narrow this down. There we go. And then ultimately you can use your eraser and get more of a rougher edge on that. So I mean, you can really use any brush tip type that you want. Oops. There you go. There's a ton of different ways that you can do it, but that's two ways right there. Okay, so we should have these rocket engines, that, and then lastly those little rings there. Okay, so I've grabbed a whole bunch of images here for reference and for color reference as well, just to look at to see what kind of materials we can be looking at for the actual rocket engine, the rocket pack. And I found a few things that I thought looked interesting, like these different metals. One's copper, and I think another one is brass. And then these airplane rivets, which are interesting. Now, we're not going for realism specifically for this. If you want to go with realism, there's a very different approach. You wouldn't draw all these outlines necessarily first, but you could get sort of a pseudo sketch realism in here. And most of this is actually for the sake of reference. Now, there's this one interesting piece up here. This one right here. Probably be better to rotate it this way as a color reference, because it'll make for a really good color that we can actually use to put this rocket engine together. Now that I have all these here, the reason I like to put them in Photoshop is then I can pull the colors directly from them. Since I'm not, like I said, I'm not really a painter. What I can do is really just pull these colors out and start painting them in with a really big soft brush, sort of getting an idea of what the color might be for it, and maybe put the opacity down. Actually, let's change the foundation color to something more neutral in this area. So I'm just pulling a color directly from here. That's sort of in the mid-range. And then I can do my darks in here because I know everything around here is probably going to be a darkish color. And don't forget to work in lots of layers. Well, it's up to you, but I tend to work in a lot of layers. Putting my brush opacity down to like 20 or 30%, and then gradually moving through this color space. I know that I'm going to want the edge of the rocket pack here to be the brightest. Probably, there's a really strong yellow in there. I'm just holding the Alt button down to find the yellows. So I'll go really bright on the edge here, and then start moving back to my darks. And I can really up my opacity. Just try to find that. Get that yellow in there. Sort of losing it a little bit. Just narrow this up. So I want to actually let's try to follow this line a little bit. There we go. And then there's a bit of a yellow in there, so I'll just try to get that, find that in there. There we go. And I mean, don't forget, you may notice that there's a very brushed look to it. So I'm going to zoom in and have a look at it. It has a directional stroke happening to it. So we don't want to just use the soft brush, but I'm just using it to get an overall lighting and treatment here. I think for this edge, we're going to go light, but we're not going to go as bright. We're assuming the light source is sort of coming from the top right-hand side a little bit. So we'll definitely need to brighten this area up here quite a bit. Oops. Let's go more for the bright pink tones. Zero that out. There's nothing wrong with cheating and using as many of your resources as you can to pull things off, because there's a lot to learn when you're coming up with this sort of stuff. So many steps to learn and so many things to get good at that if you wait till you're good at all of them, you'll never ever make anything. So if you have to, it's better to cheat the process a little bit and find a way to work around your limitations. And this is one way that I definitely like to use to come up with things that look way better than I'm actually capable of producing on my own. Okay, I'd say that's a good enough start for now. Let's go in here and maybe I want to darken this up a little more in this section here. Go down here, and maybe we'll go in here really quick and actually just brighten it up down here a bit from the bounce light that's probably coming from the ground here. Just adding a little bit of an edge on this. There we go. So let's create a new layer before we do too much of that. So I just press Control-Shift-N to create a new layer. I'm just adding these sort of bounce lights here. Cool those off a bit. And again, some down here. There we go. Okay, so now if we want to start achieving some of the texture, I can add a new layer. I can put it to overlay or whatever I want. And let's go and grab a brush that has a little more directional texture to it. I know there's a bunch that are actually right in Photoshop. This one will probably do it. Let's just increase the size on this one. And put the flow way up. Now if you're doing an overlay layer, sometimes you have to reduce the saturation if you don't want to change the color too much. So this is just to add some texture to this. I can come in here, paint some texture. And start getting some of that streaky look going on. And if you want to go for more of like kind of a patchy look, again, there's all different types of brushes that you can set up. I don't really want to get into making custom brushes too much here and to play with, but you can make all sorts of little brushes here. I've got some that we can use. Kind of bring out some rusty, less perfect metal looks. And you can see by using this on an overlay pass, I'm getting that color out of it. It's a little more interesting. There we go. And then I kind of want to cool it off in the back here. So let's brighten this up because I don't want to change the value too much, but I want to change the color a bit. So there we go. So I'm just cooling that off. And then inside here, inside the rocket engine, we'll get to that later. And actually, let's go to a softer brush here. Grab this bright color because I want to get this nice and bright here. Yep. Then a line there. Anyways, you can go on forever with this stuff. I mean, it's really a matter of how much detailing you really want to do. And all I really wanted to show you here is that it's possible. Not that I don't want to go through the whole process because it is a long, can be a very long process getting all the details and making something look realistic. I've just sped up the video and I'm adding highlights and moving through, just adding some basic detailing with normal layers and overlay layers, just trying to get out some details and flesh out the rocket a little bit more and work on the color a bit. And I really struggle with this stuff because, like I said, I'm not really a painter, so I spend a lot of time going back and forth and trying different things and essentially learning while I go. And here I've just added an army olive green to this. I did this with a normal layer and then I just went in on top with an overlay and started adding highlights. Okay. So you can see we start having something as we keep working and refining it, it'll look better and better. I have the outlines on it. If you want to work without outlines, it's up to you. Again, it's more work. Okay, so one of the last steps I would do with this particular layer is once I had it all colored in and everything like that, I'd actually go to, I have a whole bunch of textures that I've saved up over the years, and I would just go to one of my metals. I have lots of metal, and I would just grab one of these metals, probably one of the dirtier ones. Let's go with this one. This one's got some rivets in it. And you can find tons of free textures online or you can buy them. It's up to you. So I've just copied it. I can paste it in here. And you can see that it's gone in here just fine. There we go. Now what I can do is just sort of resize this a little bit till it looks about right. And then I usually test them first too with a number of different types of layer passes. Like that's an overlay, that's a soft. It really depends on what you're going for. You can add multiple ones. Like you could, if you select this by pressing Control in the thumbnail and then just doing this, you can actually use an eraser that maybe is a more stylized eraser. So let's go find one of the dirtier brushes that I have, or the scrubbier looking ones, and I can start erasing that off. And it gives me the opportunity to put all kinds of different textures on this thing. So I could have a number of different layers of texturing. The other really cool thing, which I should show you really quickly before we wrap up here, is let's say I have a brush here. I'm going to create a new brush. I'm going to go to my brushes. So right now I have this brush. Well, let's say I have some of these scrubby brushes that I've made or you can download for free. So I have this brush here. What you can do is, I'm just going to add this. I have this new layer. I'm going to add an effect to this. First, let's just paint this let's paint this out of sight of this for now. So I'm going to paint this really opaque. I'm going to go in here, double click the layer, and I'm going to add a bevel, and I'm going to bring the size way down and get the light angle the way I want. Okay, so the light's sort of coming from the top right corner. And I'm not going to use this white. I would want more of a kind of a warmer light because this character is going to be outside, so it's kind of a yellow. And then my shadow, I want more to be kind of a cool bluish color, and multiply is fine. Okay, let's just go with that for now. And then I can tone this down. Now check this out. What I can do is remove the fill, and that maintains the actual, the bevel. And actually I want that bevel to be more of a dent. So go back to the bevel, put it to down. So now it's like looks indented. So now what I can do is let's go inside and pull this into the rocket layer. Now what I can do is I can go in here and actually paint some detailing in here that actually responds to like a bevel look. It may be hard to notice what's going on, but I'm actually getting a fairly cool looking bevel effect. So let's grab another brush. Maybe like we'll grab a really tight one like this and just see what's happening. I can go in and create these bevel lines here. I could create scratches. And if I want to create scratches, I can increase that fill opacity just a bit. So let's say I'm going to erase everything that I've done. Let's say I want to create scratches that are sort of like light scratches on metal. Well, I can pick my white color. Let's bring the fill way down. A little further. And then I can just start drawing scratches on this. Let's bring it up to 10 maybe. So these are like sort of scratches on the metal. I can make them black, whatever I want. And then, I mean, you can do this for anything. You could go in and start painting rivets if you want. If you want to start painting some rivets in there, you could be really essentially doing anything you want with that. There you go. So I'm going to reduce that fill. I don't like how white those are. There we go. And I mean, you can create a whole bunch of different layers like this and start adding all sorts of textures to this thing. And the other thing you can do is grab another texture, open, let's find another metal that has maybe some straight lines in it. Let's grab one that's like brushed metal. Okay, I'll paste it inside this scene. I'll paste it under the overlay stuff. So we have this brushed metal. Now I'm going to shrink it down so it just fits the rocket. Back here. I'm trying to get that bright spot where I want it. There we go. Now this is just for an example. Like, actually I might rotate that. Actually, let's flip it. So I want the top brighter, not the bottom. Let's flip it. There we go. Okay. Let's actually put this above everything. Okay, so now what I can do is using my, let's crop it so it's only as big as the rocket. Okay, close this off. And then using transform, let's use this, and then we can use this to give it a bit more of a curvature that actually matches the rocket better. There we go. We can start getting that nice curve that we want. I'm not so worried about what's happening in this middle section because we're not actually going to see that because the cushion will be in the way. There we go. And then what I'll do is maybe increase the contrast. Actually, we'll use curves for that. Just increase the contrast. And then I can put this to overlay or another a number of other different things. You can see I'm getting that more of a brushed metal texture. And then lastly, on top of all of this, I can start adding some maybe exhaust stuff. So let's go here, and I've got like a little cloud brush here. You can go down here. I'm going to put the flow down to 25. I'm going to put it as a multiply layer. I mean, it's probably a good idea to name your layers as you go too. And then I'm just going to grab like sort of a darkish, sooty brownish color. And I can start adding some streaks. So I'll bring my opacity way down. I'll just start adding some streaks here. When it comes to detailing the actual rocket, I didn't give it a lot of thought because I was just really doing an example, but it is important to think about how this character wears the pack. Where would wear marks be? Where would scratches and scuffs be? Would his arms come in contact with a lot? Is it a new rocket? Is it an old rocket? These exhaust ports, are they exhaust ports? Are they intakes? So it's really important to think of all these things while you're creating the story for this object. And what I'm doing here is after I finished creating my weathering, I'm just experimenting and trying to bring some lightness back into this because it really got dark on me. Anyways, it's a real trial and error mission for me, and I think I finally got something that was all right, but I wouldn't say it's perfect. Okay, before we wrap this video up, what I decided to do was go in on Rocket Randee's head and do one of the faces and paint it out and just sort of show you the process in high speed of what I do. Essentially, I use all the techniques that we've applied already to get the face masked off. And what I'm doing here is I'm painting a color ball or a color sphere that I use to create a palette that I can actually pull from. If I don't have an image, I'm going to source directly. Sometimes I do these just to challenge myself to create some really nice color gradients. And I've brought in a character's face here because I like the color of her skin better than the skin I came up with. So I decided to create a color gradient directly from sampling her face. And I just jump back and forth to try to smooth those colors out, and I use the Alt to select the color between two colors. If there's a really hard mark, I just sort of jump between the two of them and softly smooth it out. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube that you can find that actually show you a bit of this process. So right here, I'm just painting in the darks, and I'm starting with just actually painting with color. There's a lot of different ways you can approach painting a face or painting skin or anything in Photoshop. And this one, I'm actually just pulling my light and dark values directly from the skin ball that I've made. What I decided to do after this was actually desaturate what I had done and work in a grayscale, which is an alternative to actually working with colors. And it can sometimes be a lot easier way to work, especially if you're like me and you're not a great painter and you're not really good with colors. Working in a grayscale, you can at least get your light and dark values laid in and get a sense of the form of the character. And then you can spend a lot more time messing with the colors just with a color overlay layer. So here I fill in all my black and whites and my gray values and get the character's shape figured out. And then what I'll end up doing is creating a new folder a new group, and that group will have a color transfer mode instead of a normal or anything else. And then with that color transfer mode, I can start adding color to the scene. I've also got a paper texture put on top of this. If you can see, it's turned off right now, but I've just duplicated one of the paper layers, and it's turned it black and white and just used it as an overlay or a soft overlay. So I'm just jumping between a really basic soft edge brush and a hard edge brush. And if you want to do that, you can use the left and right square brackets. If you press shift and on the right square bracket, you actually increase or decrease the hardness or softness of the brush. You can it's the same button you use to actually scale the brush up and down. So you can move really quickly and actually soften the edges without having to change your brush all the time. Now here I'm just picking colors and experimenting with trying to get the face to look a little better, and I really don't like where it's going. So I decided to do a green base. This is a technique that some artists use. By using a green base, it gives me a little more variety in the actual skin color. If the character, let's say, was in a dark cave or in a blue ambient lit space, I could use a blue base and just sort of add my flesh tones from there. So I decided green because I kind of figured he'd be outside, and green's a really good starting color for me. It usually just works out better. And I just start sampling from there and using my brush at a lower opacity, just painting on top over and over again, adding colors, adding purples and blues, and just sort of experimenting until I get a look I'm going for. I actually end up being a little bit too magenta on this character, and I'd say I lost the really good flesh tone that I had earlier, but that's okay. It's really more just an example. And from here, I decide to add some speckles to his skin. So I'm just manipulating a brush and trying to get some more speckly brushes to add some dimples or like little bits of freckles on him. There's something a little more interesting. Now, I actually end up losing some of the skin tone that I really liked in the beginning, and I spend a lot of time trying to get it back because right now it's really too purple. There's a lot of purple and pink in there. He looks like he's a little bit sick. But I think the main idea here is just the experimentation and going through the process of painting some colors and using really many different techniques to pull that off. I would strongly recommend with your characters that if you have really intense stage lighting, like really sharp rims and highlights on the character, one of the problems that can arise from that, if the character's moving a lot, if you have like a really bright, let's say like a blue rim highlight along the back of the arm, and then on the front of the arm you have a nice yellow or warm light cast on it, and if that arm rotates all the way around, that blue rim lighting, the backlighting, will follow the arm all the way around, and it can really ruin the illusion. So I often create the characters with pretty neutral lighting, and then what you can use later on is a number of techniques to actually simulate the rim lights or the edge lighting that you want to get. I find it works better for me if I paint them almost like they're in a cloudy sky environment. So it's really just general ambient lighting, and you're not painting hard shadows. You're more just painting where the ambient occlusion would happen, where the light is just lost because of intersecting surfaces. So I usually think of it while I'm painting that there's a bright skylight coming from the top somewhere with a little bit of a directional sense to it, and then your shadows are usually on the bottom side. If you have some bounce light, I like to consider the environment that the character's in, but you can add a lot of that stuff later in After Effects. In the next video, we'll finish prepping the Photoshop files so that it can be imported into After Effects, and we can start the rigging process for Rocket Randee. If you like what ED Films is doing and want to stay up to date on the latest developments and tutorials, please show your support by liking us on Facebook.